What's up, folks? This is an Age of Wushu guide focusing on the game's somewhat confusing stats and attributes, as well as the damage types of the attacks found in the game, and how those stats determine the damage of different types of attacks. So let's jump straight in by going through the game's different stats one at a time. Okay, the first stat you see is HP. Pretty self-explanatory. That's your health. That is determined by stamina and brawn, which we'll talk more about in a second. Next is your energy, also known as mana, also known as internal force. And that is also very simple, self-explanatory, and it's determined by spirit and breath, which we'll also talk more about in just a second. The next one on the list you'll see is your flying skill. That's just basically a stamina meter of how much you can use flying skills in the game. And I don't think, as of right now, I don't know of any ways to increase that, so, you know, it's just there so you can see it's kind of irrelevant. This next stat is Vigor, also known as Strength. It's basically just a stat that's used as a limiter on how much you can use crafting skills in the game. And that's about all it does. Nutrition is the next stat. You just have to eat food to keep this up, or you'll slowly start dying, which can be really annoying. Now this stat is actually important. This is your Infamy. This is basically your criminal rating. So the more crimes you commit, like player killing, you will get more and more infamy. When this reaches 2,000, you can be killed and then sent to jail. So don't let it get too high. You can also eventually be executed, and you have to pay a lot to get out of jail and stuff. And when you get executed, you get a big stat debuff for like a 24-hour period. So this is actually one you have to watch out for. Make sure you don't let it get too high unless you just want to. This is one that a lot of people are probably going to be like, what? Alcohol? What is that? Well, it's actually talking about you can drink alcohol in the game to get your tolerance up to alcohol, which actually can be useful in combat because some classes and skills in the game will actually make you drunk. So if you have a higher tolerance, those skills will be less effective in combat against you. Okay, now we're getting into the game's 5 main attributes that determine the rest of your stats and the damage of your skills. And the first one that you see is Brawn. Brawn gives you melee power, max HP, and critical hit on your physical or external skills. The next stat of the 5 main attributes is Posture, which can be very confusing because you will also see it in the game as Balance, and is also commonly referred to as Agility. What this stat does is it gives external hit rating, it gives you dodge rating, and it gives you range, power, or damage rating. The next of the 5 main attributes is Breath, which increases your internal skill damage or your spell damage, and it also increases your mana that you have to cast with or your energy. And you've heard me say internal and external skill damage. We're going to get to more about the skill damages in just a moment. The next of the 5 main attributes is Spirit. Now Spirit does quite a bit. It not only does it increase your internal skills hit rating, it also increases your internal skills critical hit rating, as well as also giving you a flat max increase on your mana or internal force. On top of that, it does 2 more things. It also increases your internal defense, and it increases your recovery or regen rate of your internal force or mana. The last of the 5 main attributes is Stamina. Stamina, also like Brawn, increases your max HP, and it also increases your tenacity, also known as your resilience, as well as your HP recovery speed or your health regen speed. The first of the 4 defensive stats that you see down here at the bottom is Evade, which is also known as Dodge, which, as I said before, is determined by posture. And Evade or Dodge is just your chance to dodge incoming skills or attacks. The next of the 4 defensive stats that you see here is Resilience, also known as Tenacity, which, as I said before, is determined by your stamina. And basically all this stat is your resistance to critical strikes. The next stat here is your block rating, which is basically just the percent of damage that will be reduced when you block attacks. So as you can see, 50% is the base reduction plus the 5% extra that I'm getting, which means that any attack that hits me while I'm blocking will be reduced in damage by 55%. The last of these 4 defensive stats here at the bottom is External Defense, which is basically your armor rating, and this stat just serves to reduce the damage you take from external or physical attacks. Okay, now before going any further, I want to go ahead and clarify for everyone about the different types of damage in this game. Now you have basically, like you'll be used to from most other MMOs, two types of damage. You have physical and you have magic, which in this game are called external skill and internal skill. Okay, let's briefly talk about external skills or physical skills, and then we will talk about internal skills or magic skills. Now, the first thing you need to know about external skills is there's two types. You have melee and you also have ranged. Melee is the attack power of melee is determined by brawn directly. The attack power of ranged external skills is directly improved by the posture or balance stat. Now, the hit of all external skills, melee and ranged, it will always be determined by balance or posture. And the crit rating of external skills or physical skills will always be determined by brawn, even for melee or ranged. The other type of damage in the game is internal skill damage or magic damage, if you will. And internal skill damage is split into 4 different types of damage. These 4 types of internal skill damage are known as hard damage, soft damage, yin damage, and yang damage. These 4 types of damage can be one of the most confusing parts of this game, because hard and soft will not show up as hard and soft on most abilities on the tooltip. Hard will show up as gold damage, and soft will show up as wood damage. Also, while we're here, let's just take note that the internal defense stats are basically just resist for those schools of internal defense or magic damage. Any skill that says that it does gold, wood, yin, or yang damage will have its damage increased by breath, and it will have its hit and its critical rating determined by the stat of spirit. The only other stat worth mentioning on this tab that I haven't yet is the internal skill defense stat, which is basically just how much you can continuously block before your block will be broken, which will probably never happen because most people will just break your block with a feint skill if you're blocking that much. Okay, now that we understand internal and external damage, we can finally actually look at the stats and say which ones do we need to be building in order to be getting the most out of it. What stats you need to be building can not only vary from school to school, but from style to style within each school, and even from ability to ability within each style. What this means is you may have to have multiple sets of gear just to use different fighting styles within your own school. So next I'm just going to give you a few examples of skills within different schools, just so you have an idea of what you need to be looking for, so that you don't get confused or end up wasting your time getting stats that aren't going to help you in a particular fighting style or fighting stance. Okay, we're going to take a look at a couple of examples from the Wanderers Valley School and its 3 sets, and this one is from its Palm set. And you'll see in the first red box there is a blue number, and that blue number is letting us know that this skill is being increased in damage by breath. In the second red box you will see the word yang, letting us know that this skill is doing yang damage, or internal skill also known as magic damage, which means that it will have its crit and its hit rating determined by your spirit stat. Okay, now we have another Wanderers Valley example. This is from their 3rd set, which uses 2 daggers, and it is showing us in the first red box we see a green number after the yellow base damage of the skill. And that green number, even though it's green, well, sometimes in other schools it will be shown as red. But on this school it's being shown as green, which could be kind of confusing, but I can assure you that you can tell from how high the number is that it is being determined by my bronze stat, because it is a melee move. Now, the skill also says external damage, which lets us know that it is a physical damage skill, which means it will have its hit rating determined by posture or balance, and it will have its crit rating determined by brawn. Okay, here we have a 3rd example from the Wanderers Valley School. This is from the primary set, which uses 2 double blades. In the first red box, you'll see 2 green numbers. These green numbers are, the first one is determined by your bronze stat, and the second one is determined by your breath stat. In other schools, like I said before on the other stat, you will see the bronze one shown as red and the breath one shown as blue, so it's less confusing. In the next red box, you will see that this skill does gold damage, which is also known as hard damage. That lets us know that this skill does internal skill damage or magic damage, which means it will have its crit and its hit rating determined by the spirit attribute. Okay, so what we're basically seeing here is a lot of inconsistency. on what stats you need to be stacking for one school, because this school, Wanderers Valley, has a primary stats of breath and brawn. As we saw in the first style here, you're going to be doing damage based off of breath, and you're going to be doing yang damage, which is internal skill damage, which is going to have its hit and its crit rating based off of spirit. So for this entire fighting style within this school, brawn is not going to play any role whatsoever. Now going back to the second style that we looked at, the double sting style, this style is going to have its damage primarily increased by brawn, and its external skill damage, which means its hit rating, will require you to have balance or posture, and your crit rating will also be determined off of your brawn for this entire set, making spirit and breath worthless for it. Whereas back here on the hybrid style, or the primary style of the Wanderers Valley School, you get damage off of brawn and breath at the same time, but it's internal skill damage, so you're going to have spirit, once again, to get up your crit and your hit rating for all the moves in this set. So clearly the stats that you need to be stacking to maximize your DPS is really going to be determined not by your school, but by what stance or fighting style you want to use from your school. Okay, so let's look at a second set of examples from the Tangman School so that we can kind of further our understanding of what stats we need to be stacking, for the respective school or set within a school that we're going to be using. Now here you'll see in the first box it says +7 in green, and then in the second box it says an external skill of damage, which means it'll have its crit always determined by brawn, and then it'll always have its hit rating determined by your balance. But the first number is not determined by brawn because this is a dart skill, this is a range skill, so this is going to actually have its damage determined by balance or posture instead. Now here in another set from the Tangman School, we're going to see a hybrid skill that is having its damage determined by brawn and also by breath, but it is an external skill, so it's going to have its crit determined by brawn and it's going to have its hit determined by balance. Now let's take a look at a second skill from this same style within Tangman, which is also a melee move, which is only having its damage increased by brawn and its external skill, so it's going to have its crit determined by brawn and its hit determined by posture. Now, this is very confusing because, you're kind of getting mixed signals. One move within this one set is going to use brawn and breath, while the other move is going to use just brawn. And at the same time, you're also going to need balance for both of these abilities just to get your hit rating up. Okay, now looking at a third set from Tangman School, we see in the first green box that this is having its damage increased by brawn because it's a melee move, and it's also external skill, so we know it's got its brawn as its modifier for its crit, and it's going to have balance or posture determining its hit rating. Now looking at another skill from the exact same set within the Tangman School, we see that this ability requires balance or posture to increase its damage because it's a ranged move using darts, but it's still an external damage skill, so it's still going to have its crit determined by brawn as well as its hit rating determined by your balance. So for this set you're going to want to primarily focus on balance and brawn at the same time because some of your skills are melee and some of them are ranged, so you're going to need both for crit and hit rating, but you're going to need both for damage increase as well. So here I just want to show you an example of where it'll say wood damage, which means soft damage, so we know that's a type of internal or magic damage, which means the hit and crit rating of this ability would be determined by your spirit. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is very important is stat caps. Now when you start gearing up, after you figured out what stats you need to be stacking based off of what style of fighting you're using, you want to watch out for stat caps because very quickly if you're buying gear, you're going to hit these stat caps on the stats that aren't your primary stats, and when you do that, you're not going to get any more stats after that. So the gear, even though it may have the stats on it, is going to be worthless to you and it's going to be wasted, and you're going to have wasted a lot of money. And this is very easy to do if you don't pay attention to your stat caps. So make sure you look at your internal school skills and look where I have it highlighted here in the yellow text. Those are your stat caps. The yellow text on the left is your stat cap, and the blue text on the right is how much you have bonus in that stat, so it's showing you how close to the cap you are. And you want to make sure that you're not going over your cap, because otherwise you're going to be wasting stats. Alright folks, well I hope that this video helped you if you were confused at all while playing this game. It can be very confusing due to the inconsistency within the text and the grammatical errors, but most of that should be fixed soon, as there is a patch that's supposed to be coming out before the game heads out of beta that will be revamping the UI and fixing a lot of the issues, making it more user friendly. If you like the video, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and I hope to do battle with all of you soon.